Hey, what's up everybody? Commander Radix here bringing you another video, and boy oh boy, is today going to be a very spicy video. I am very curious to see the comment section that grows below this video. So, there is a issue that I want to address here today. A few days ago, or at least a few days ago from when I'm recording this video, I released a poll on my community tab here on YouTube. And that poll is, which video are you most interested in? And the options were why you should read, why read the classics, what is the role of fiction in our lives, and how to be a healthy fan and not a consumer. Or a consumer. And wow, there were 70 votes on that poll. That is quite a lot. I wasn't expecting that many people voting. And to be honest, those 4 video ideas are kind of connected to each other. One feeds into the next one, if you notice, and but the video people were most interested in is the video that would be like the last part of a 4-part series. But that last part is the one that got the most votes, so I figured I'll make this video because I think a few of us, I've noticed some of you in the comment section, I know that a few of us could need this video potentially. So welcome to my video where I discuss how to be a healthy fan and not a consumer. Now the question is that we have to start off is, what is a consumer? Now the consumer is an interesting meme archetype that hasn't really been solidified in its own distinct meme like other certain memes that end in OOER. But the name exists and the idea is out there. A consumer is someone who, frankly, I think it's basically synonymous with the term fan. People will argue with me on this, but I don't want to get into that. It's when someone likes something, a certain thing, let's say a certain brand, so much that they sort of turn it into their identity. Maybe they were, you know, a more healthy fan to begin with, but then later on it started less becoming a fan of the art itself or the media itself and turned into a love of the brand in its entirety. And they've turned that brand into their identity. Symptoms of being a consumer includes, making sure that you're up to date on the release of every single thing, you know, putting things in your life on hold so you can go consume the next thing of that brand. And you can be a consumer for multiple brands, right? Buying merchandise, buying memorabilia, not just buying in general, but buying large amounts of memorabilia. Having shelves full of Funko Pops. I got married to a Funko Pop. As an adult, now I want to be clear here, there's different expectations between an adult and a child, right? You know, if a child has a big collection of Transformers, that's pretty based, that's pretty red-pilled, right? But if someone is 40 years old and still buying the newest releases of Transformers toys, then we need to look into their motivations a little bit. Although I'm getting ahead of myself. A consumer, what is a consumer? Very often a consumer will be very, what's the word, toxic? I hate to use the word toxic, but toxic to people, giving out any sort of criticism of the brand that they've attached themselves to, in the way a nationalist might get ticked off at someone critiquing a country that they love so much. Or a zealot could react to blasphemy being uttered. And they can spend all day doing something related to that thing, you know. Let's say they even have, like, when they find someone and decide to marry them specifically because they're both consumers, both hardcore fans of that one thing, and then their marriage ceremony is themed entirely after that one product. Now there are nuances here, right, and I hope if you watch the whole video you can understand those nuances and understand what I mean. We're going to have some broad statements here at the beginning. I'm just sort of laying the groundwork for what a consumer is and why we don't want to be like them. By the way, I know my webcam keeps like phasing in and out and making me fuzzy and all of that. I've tried so much to make it work. At this point I've lost motivation. But I think that's enough for an explanation of what a consumer is for the time being. I think you'll understand more what I mean as we go through the video. And I want to make clear that consumers are consuming something that I'm going to call pop fiction, usually. Now, there are different definitions for pop fiction, so I want to make sure we're clear on what I am talking about when we're talking about pop fiction in this context. I'm talking about usually things that are more modern and things that are controlled by a brand, by a franchise that is persistently continuing on, if that makes sense. It might make more sense if I give some solid examples. And you guys know me, you guys know the channel, you guys know what I'm thinking about here. Transformers is an example of what I would call pop fiction, a modern fiction ongoing brand, right? Star Wars can also fall into this, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, comics in general, well, DC Comics, the DC Universe, and Marvel Universe specifically. Maybe not so much comics in general, more like those two. Comics is a very big genre, but I digress. This can be Star Trek, this can be Harry Potter, this can be Lord of the Rings. And you guys know that I love Lord of the Rings, so don't make the mistake of thinking that you can only be a consumer for things that aren't epic and based in red pill. Like Lord of the Rings. You can be a consumer for Lord of the Rings, and that's something we want to tackle. But I think you get the idea of what I mean by pop fiction, sort of the definition I'm going with here. I also want to give a quick disclaimer. I know this has been a long introduction. I have been recording for 11 minutes so far. I am terrified to think of how long this video will be. But I want to put a quick disclaimer out here because I know the internet can sometimes read into things. I am not telling you how to live your life. This video is just me saying some suggestions. You understand your context and your scenario better than I do. So I'm just hoping that maybe this video can put into the air some principles that some people who need to hear those principles can hear and start to apply it to their own lives and try to live a more healthier lifestyle. And by healthy here, I'm mostly talking about mental health. Mental and emotional health. Maybe spiritual health, if we want to get into that. But I am not telling you how to live your life. Please don't misunderstand me in this video. Now with this video, I'm kind of talking to 2, maybe 3 different types of people in this video. And it's hard for me because these people are very different people. On the one hand, I am talking to the consumer, right? I am trying to address the consumer saying, hey buddy, we love you, let's try to get things together, right? You're great and all, but you won't stop talking about this specific sports ball player the whole time. And I would like to have a conversation with you and me and not have you bring up that sports ball player every single second. And indeed, this is talking about pop fiction, but we can include things like how people can get fanatical about sports. Frankly, we can get into how people get fanatical about specific idols and not necessarily just K-pop, but K-pop especially, I've noticed. Taylor Swift is also a big one. And this is a phenomenon that goes back to like the Beatles and Elvis. But when you lose your identity and something that is misplaced in the hierarchy of important things, it'll make more sense as I go on, trust me. But yeah, I'm talking to the consumer. I'm also talking to another very different group of people in this video. I'm talking to the people who, let's say they were a big Batman fan. They really loved Batman, but as they grew up, you know, they became a consumer for Batman. But then as they grew up, they realized that Batman was in the wrong place in their life. They had put him on a pedestal, something, you know, a fictional character, and decided that they were going to throw off Batman. You know, ignore Batman. I've grown up. I don't need Batman anymore. Let's move on, and then continue their life, and then sort of get angry at people who are, you know, let's say they're 30, 40, but still like Batman, right? That's another demographic I'm trying to talk to in this video, because one of the main ideas of this video is that being a healthy fan and being a consumer are 2 different things, and that you don't have to completely toss out whatever it is that you're a fan of. There is a way to, in a healthy way, be a fan. it might be hard for us to understand these days, especially with the internet and with social media, where let's say you're just casually into, well, not even casual, let's say you really like something like Batman, and then you go to the internet, and we're all on the internet, and we're all on social media. You go into social media, and then that kind of turns you into a consumer, because then you see people turning that character into their identity, talking about it really passionately, which is good, but then that passion can turn into identity, and then we have a whole slew of issues there. I forgot how that sentence started. But yeah, there is a way to be a fan of something without being overblown with it. And if both of those scenarios sound completely alien to you, that you don't really apply to any of those two tropes of people, and you're just listening to me thinking I'm insane talking about a phenomenon that doesn't happen, this video isn't for you. The people who know. But the third person I'm kind of talking to is more of my past self, because I'm going to talk about some issues about being a consumer that I can only speak from my own experience, and it's entirely possible that the symptoms of my consumerism were symptoms that only really were present in me, and my experiences are not universal. For example, obsession with continuity and the details of canon, that might just be me, right? Looking at my, or especially early Transformers lore episode comments, that might just be me. That might just be my problem. And something that wasn't really my problem was, spending all of my money on Transformers toys, although I see a lot of Transformers fans fall into that problem, even though that wasn't really a big problem for me. So keep in mind, while I talk about symptoms of a consumer, you might have symptoms I don't talk about, and I might be talking about symptoms I've had that you have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, the main thesis of this video about how to be a healthy fan and not a consumer is this: moderation is key. Some of you guys might remember my video when I talked about when I was going to stop using the internet, and that was a good idea. I haven't followed through with that much. I've gone back to the internet, but I will say that month or so that I just spent not using the internet kind of restructured my life. It changed a lot. I think there is a stark difference that you can tell in the 2024, 2023, 2022 Radix versus 2021, 2020, 2019 Radix and before. And I would really connect that with that time I spent offline. But you might know that I started reading in general, right? And to be clear, my consumer source was mostly Transformers. Mostly Transformers. You guys know my channel. You guys know that. But you guys know that I started reading more when I spent my time offline. That I really got into reading. Really starting with the Iliad, but also with the Bible. I got really into the classics, and that sort of changed everything. But when I went through that phase where I was reading just the classics, just classical literature, and by classic I don't mean 1800s, I mean 800 and before. Reading classical literature by the Greeks, by the Romans, by the Chinese, by the Japanese, and also Christian literature, things like the Lives of the Saints, theological texts, things like that. When I was getting really into that, and philosophy for that matter, when I was getting really into that, I was kind of looking down on not just consumer stuff, not just pop fiction like Transformers, but also just fiction in general. And I think one of the videos I want to make is the value of fiction. So this video isn't necessarily talking about the value of fiction specifically per se. It just sort of falls into this story. But I sort of said, you know what, I'm not going to read fiction. Fiction's a waste of time. I'm just going to read these, classical texts. And the classical texts were good, but I was just missing something. It wasn't complete. It wasn't a holistic, healthy approach to literature. And by the way, I'm going to talk about these things in terms of literature, in terms of classics versus comics, but that just because that applies more to my situation. My consumerism with Transformers was mostly with the comics, more so than anything else. But yeah, I cut out a lot of stuff, but over time I started to kind of miss that. Especially things like Batman, who has a lot of great stories. I sort of missed Batman, and there are some moments from Batman and Transformers that my mind just kept going back to. I kept thinking about when Batman went into Apocalypse to save Damian Wayne in the the Robin Reborn series? I can't remember the name, but I kept remembering things like from Last Stand the Wreckers and All Hail Megatron and stuff like that. Story beats that were really powerful, but I wasn't with them anymore. And I'm like, yeah, that's Transformers. Those are the characters that really helped me through tough times. But, you know, now I'm with Jesus Christ. Which, to be fair, pretty OP. But I'm with Plato now, and I'm with Homer, I'm with Herodotus now, and I'm with St. Augustine and St. Gregory Palamas and all that. St. Patrick, the works of St. John of Damascus. I'm reading the Hagakure, which is like a Bushido code book. So I don't need Batman anymore. I don't need Optimus Prime anymore. They're for kids. And indeed, they are, at their root, children's fiction. Children's fiction plays an important role of being able to impute the values and virtues, which is the role of fiction. And if I ever make a video talking about the role of... I know I'm fuzzy, by the way. And if I ever make a video about the role of fiction, we can go into more detail on that. But, you know, adult fiction is harder for children to get their minds wrapped around, and they're the ones most in need of, you know, imputing a virtue and things like that. So that's the role of children's fiction. Children's fiction is not bad. It's very good for the purpose it has. But, you know, there's this idea that as an adult, you don't need to read that stuff anymore. But one thing about our capitalist structured society, and in the business model of always trying to get fans, no matter what age group, an interesting thing has happened in the modern day where stories and franchises originally meant for children sort of grow up with their audience. You know, there are Transformers comics that I could not see a child enjoying at all, that are much more adult, same with Batman. In fact, a lot of the Batman comics themselves really aren't child-friendly. But my point is that as an adult, you can consume with a U-M-E, not an O-O-M, content from franchises that were originally intended for children, right? Transformers, Batman, right? So don't try to, like, force yourself to not read that stuff on that grounds, if that makes sense. Again, moderation is key. Don't just cut it out entirely. If you're forcing it, it's not a healthy decision. So I want to get that out of the way. We'll talk about how you should consume later, but we're just getting the key idea of being balanced here and holistic. One principle that I want you to think about in consuming healthily is less is more. You get more enjoyment out of something when you experience it less. Think about McDonald's. You know, eating McDonald's every single day kinda sucks. You kinda feel terrible. Take it from me, who has once eaten McDonald's every single day. But if you eat it, you know, once a month, every once in a while, that's some good stuff, my man. That is the stuff. You know, really think about your addictions, right? Everyone has some sort of addiction on something, something of another. That's not how English works. But if you think about it, your addiction really at this point has become habitual, you know? Let's say you're addicted to ice cream and you just keep eating ice cream. Well, at this point, are you enjoying the ice cream as much as you've enjoyed it those first few times? I'd argue that your addiction has become habitual, but you are not enjoying it as much as you did when you began. Pop fiction is very similar. I'm going to make a lot of analogies to diet throughout this this video, possibly because that is subconsciously on my mind due to it being Lent. But as part of a diet, when you hear different dieting advice, you sometimes hear the advice of don't restrict yourself to what you eat because that's going to cause some issues, and I agree to an extent when you're starting off. For example, one advice I've heard is when you set out to start a diet, don't start with, oh, I'm going to cut out all sugar, right? Instead, think of it as I'm going to incorporate vegetables into my diet. I'm going to add fruits, vegetables, salads, things like that into my diet. Cutting out junk food altogether can, in its own sense, be unhealthy. Not necessarily physically. Physically, you'll only gain from that. But mentally and emotionally, going cold turkey on things like junk food is going to be a bit hard. And, you know, things like eating disorders develop. This is why I'm not recommending you cut out pop fiction 100% to be a healthy fan. This is why I think it's possible to be a healthy fan in the first place and not just, oh, throw it all out. Instead, you should read pop fiction, and I'm using that read language, but, you know, watch, whatever, apply this to whatever. You should read the pop fiction holistically in a hierarchy with other things you consume, and it should also be holistically a part of your life in a way that incorporates other parts of your life that are aimed towards something higher. So for the role that consuming in general, consuming should not be the main part of your life. And if some of you are honest, some of you will admit that it has become a main part of your life. When you think of yourself, when you define yourself as a Transformers fan first and foremost, we have an issue here, because that's not saying it's bad to be a Transformers fan, but if that's your number one identity out of all identities that make up you, that isn't in its right place in the hierarchy. I keep making a triangle. This is because I'm a member of the Illuminati. No, I'm making a triangle. This is because it's a shape that points up, and you can have multiple parts of a triangle, right? And the most top will be the most important. You know, consumer identity needs to be down here. You're putting it way up here. What is this? You know, everything needs to have its place and not be put in the wrong place. That is not how the natural order of things goes in our lives. It is, by definition, disordered to have a consumerist identity as your number one identity, or number two or number three identity for that matter. But then inside that hierarchy, we have another hierarchy of consuming, and again, pop fiction is allowed to be in there, but it needs to have its correct place. And especially if you're really bad with being a consumer, then I recommend not so much at first lowering the amount you're consuming pop fiction, but instead I suggest introducing something more like the classics. Now, the classics, and this is why, again, one of the videos in my video idea list was why you should read the classics. Maybe I'll talk more about why the classics, especially because I think a lot of people hear the classics and just think, oh, it's a bunch of old books written a really long time ago that school tells you to read. And besides that, it's not that very important. I think a lot of people don't see the value of the classics, and I think that's a problem, and that's why I will probably be making a video explaining why the classics are so fundamental when it comes to consuming fiction, non-fiction, anything really. But yeah, begin introducing yourself to the classics, and I might make a video talking about how to do that as well. Be immersed in the old classical literature. And frankly, even if your consumer habit is for an anime or a TV show or for a music artist or something like that, I would still recommend starting to reorder yourself. I would still recommend reading the classics, right? Even though that might be a different activity, right? My consumerism was with comics, and that is reading. So it makes sense that I counteracted it with reading, just of a different material. But for most of mankind's history, consuming did come in the form of reading, and you're going to have to go back in time in order to find the classics, and so it's basically going to be reading. But yes, start with being immersed in the classics, and then start to limit your consumption of pop fiction. Maybe you read a graphic novel on Wednesdays, for example, and that's your time period for when you're with comics. But besides that, your reading habits would be more focused on things like the classics every other day besides Wednesday or something like that. And again, we're saying limit the pop fiction, read more classical literature, but I want to make sure one more time that we're clear that the pop fiction isn't bad per se, it just should be consumed within a hierarchy. Why is that? This is something I wanted to talk about more in my video about what the role of fiction is. But it ultimately comes down to ideas, and a lot of modern ideas aren't really helpful to creating a constructive and ordered life. This is, why we need to limit it in the first place. That I might talk about that in the fiction video. But if you're just having issues with consuming, right? Nobody is a consumer for the Iliad. Nobody is a consumer for Plato. And instead, you'll find people who have read that stuff being more able to assert their own identity more so than someone who turns their identity into pop fiction. So let's just understand that and understand that this needs to be limited. We can go more into the details of that on another video because this video is already going to be so long. Now, we talked about limiting the pop fiction. Next, I want to talk about how and what we consume in the pop fiction. Curate what you consume of pop fiction, right? And again, I'm going to talk mostly in terms of comics, but this can apply to different types of media. But read critically acclaimed pop fiction works, and not just what's new or whatever the fandom is talking about. What this means is, let's say you want to be a healthy Batman fan, right? I recommend reading the graphic novels that everyone likes, reading the top ones. Read Batman Year One. Read Batman The Long Halloween, right? You know, on your one day a week and Wednesday or whatever. Don't get sucked into reading the most recent Batman, even the most recent trade, unless it looks good. But don't try to be a completionist like I was back when I was really into Transformers, an unhealthy amount of Transformers, a consumer of Transformers, where I was up to date on everything that was coming out fiction-wise for Transformers. Because you end up consuming a lot of crap if you do that. Remember that these are brands that inherently just want to create fiction to be consumed. Frankly, a majority of what they're going to release is not going to be good. So just because it's a new release, don't feel like you have to consume it, right? Wait until you hear the reviews, wait until you see that it's good, right? One thing, because my thing was that I was really obsessed about continuity and canon, what I'm going to recommend, especially if you're into a franchise like that with continuity, piece together your own canon. And this sounds like very weird advice from the guy that makes the Transformers lore series on YouTube. But honestly, continuity does not matter. I'm thinking particularly about 3, maybe 4 things here, maybe 5 things. I'm thinking about the DC Marvel Comics continuities. I'm thinking about Transformers, multiverse stuff. I'm thinking about the expanded universe, the expanded universe, the canon universe of Star Wars. I'm thinking about the MCU, for example. At some point, if something comes out that is bad and people hate, the franchise is going to start to pretend it didn't happen. And frankly, the more detailed you look, take it from me who got really autistic about continuity, if you get into the nitty-gritty, you realize it will not work. It does not work. Even the fictional universes that were the most coherent, Star Wars in the expanded universe days, Transformers in the multiverse days, they were more coherent than like the DC universe. But even in those, when you get down to the nitty and gritty, there are obscure things that get forgotten and things that don't work. So ultimately, at the end of the day, for your own enjoyment and for your own mental health, I recommend just piecing together your own canon, your own continuity from the critically acclaimed, positively received works. Now, obviously, when you are discussing with other fans, right, then things get different. You know, as someone who is autistically interested in the Transformers multiverse, when people give headcanons for things that the continuity has already answered, I get kind of ticked off at that. But at least for your own mental health, I recommend piecing together your own continuity, your own canon. Because you don't need to know, if you're a super Batman fan, you really don't need to know about what Batman did in Justice League International, unless you happen to already be a fan of Justice League International. And let's face it, nobody is a fan of Justice League International. Not by itself, at least. Back on the subject of comics, I recommend reading the trades. Let's say you've read all the critically acclaimed books, you know, and maybe reread them once in a while, right? If a book is good, you're going to want to reread it. But let's say you're well-versed on the classics of that franchise. You've read all the classic Batman books, so now you want to know what Batman's doing now. And there's this run going on that has a good author. People are talking a lot of good things about it, so you decide, yeah, maybe I want to keep up with that. Don't read issue by issue. It is not good for a story to be ripped apart into like 6 different pieces that each come out a month after the other. I realize I'm describing the context of a serial, but a serial is better when it's like a series of novels than when it's a series of issues. For your reading experience, it's better to read trade by trade than issue by issue. For your budget, it is better to read trade by trade than issue by issue. For your mental health in a consumerist economy, it is better for you to read trade by trade than issue by issue. Not so good for the comic industry, but, you know, we're worried about your mental health here, not corporations. And another thing, and this is a big one. Don't get offended about modernism in a modernist book. Now, what do I mean by that? There are a lot of people, particularly in things like the DC Marvel Comics fandom, and like the Star Wars fandom to a lesser degree. But there are people who make videos complaining, and not just making videos, but making posts on social media, complaining about things that they're doing in the comics these days that reflect a value system that is very modernist or postmodernist, when the fan themselves, the fan in question that's complaining, has a different value system that isn't so postmodernist. You can tell I'm being very careful with my words here. And they wonder why, look what they've ruined the Marvel Universe because this, and this happened in the comics. It's not like how they were like 20 years ago. And then people who are fans of the newer stuff see the people who are fans of the older stuff and critiquing the newer stuff as being, crazy, old, what's the word, irritable people, racists, whatever is words you want to apply, and then they attack back. And then it turns fandom online into this huge war that's essentially politics. What I have found that it is so much better for the mental health of those people complaining to just basically follow the advice I just gave in this video, to ignore new releases, stay focused on the older iterations of that brand, the classically, critically acclaimed versions of that brand, rereading books they like that have the values they like in them, but also balancing out their consumption of pop fiction with a consumption of the classics. Because if you turn your whole identity, let's say you're a Catholic, right? Let's say you're a Catholic, but for some reason you're like a modernist that has turned their whole identity into Batman. Even though if you're a Catholic, your identity should be going towards God, going towards salvation, things like that. But there are modernists out there, maybe a cradle Catholic or what have you. Not all cradle Catholics. I am jumping into water I really shouldn't jump into. But let's say you have someone who makes their whole identity Batman, and then the next day a new Batman comic comes out and it declares Batman is gay and is marrying Robin. Then the fan, whose value system does not have, gays, is going to be pretty upset at that. And then, especially if they're a consumer, they're probably using social media, they're going to post some complaining post on Twitter, and then you'll have the whole Twitter feed against him, right? The fact of the matter is, pop fiction is a modernist phenomena. Comics especially are a postmodernist phenomena. And it makes sense. As much as it might be hard for some of you to hear, it makes sense that postmodernist ideas and more modern ideas are going to be incorporated in a more postmodernist genre, in a more postmodernist media. The same, frankly, goes for movies, things like that. And I'm not necessarily saying you shouldn't be upset about that or whatever. What I'm saying is, especially if you are a consumer, we need to work on your mental health, buddy, and coming into contact with stuff without having that stuff within a proper hierarchy of your own values is going to hurt you in the long run mentally. You need to have a certain level of detachment. And this gets back to reading the classics. When you read the classics, when you develop a classical worldview, a symbolic worldview, a medieval worldview, to be honest, you're going to be able to read modernist stuff through a different lens than the sort of attached system you might have if you read it with a modernist lens. You might feel, if you're reading it with a modernist lens, you might feel compelled to be engaged in the culture war or something. But having a classical worldview, a medieval worldview, will help you understand why things are the way they are, and where you have influence and power and where you do not have influence and power, and where expending your energy is useless and where expending your energy is useful. And you'll understand why you read pop fiction more. When you read pop fiction, what you're going to be looking for when you're reading pop fiction is going to be different than what you are looking for when you're reading pop fiction now as a consumer. When Batman or when Transformers no longer becomes your number one identity, you are going to be reading it for different reasons. And frankly, you're going to be able to get more out of it. Anyway, another idea that I had is that doing things socially and in a community is edifying, in a real life community, in a real life social situation, not just online fandom, but by yourself less so. I recommend that if you can consume something, it's best to do it in a social setting. What I mean by that is, I don't recommend binging an anime by yourself over two days, which is something I am very guilty of. Rather, make it a movie night with your friends, with your family, with your significant other, what have you. Because all this consumer stuff really becomes less harmful if it's done socially. In person, not online. Video games especially is much better multiplayer, much better with friends than it is by yourself. It's much more healthy in a way. And if you want me to go into more detail on that, I can make a whole video on that. A lot of this video are a bunch of seeds of ideas that I could make full-on videos about, so if you want me to go into more detail on something, please let me know in the comments below. But yeah, going back to the classics, again, I recommend reading classics for every new book or new piece of media you consume. I recommend consuming at least one classic between that and the next new pop fiction material. If you can't do pop fiction classic or pop fiction, at the very least, maybe for every 3 pieces of pop fiction you include one classic, just as a starter, but that's not the ideal situation. But by sort of buffering the amount of consuming you're doing of pop fiction and going instead to classics, which ask more of you when you read them, you are sort of buffering your brain from just constantly consuming. You know, even consuming the classics is a little bit more active than consuming a comic. Not to say comics are bad. And by giving you that buffer space, that gives you time to digest what you consumed from the pop fiction. So one thing I'm doing, for example, back during the IDW Hasbro universe, I was reading every comic as it came out issue by issue. Now I'm reading trade by trade. And it's letting me go slower and digest the actual media. So at this point in time, you guys know that I've done my Void Rivals review, and that is the only trade paperback for the new Energon universe that's come out. I've read that, in the days I've read that, I haven't read any more comics. I've had time to just consider, you know, in the quiet times of my life, digesting what I read. That's good. You get, again, that ties into getting more out of the pop fiction when you aren't being a consumer. If you don't know where to start with the classics, one recommendation I can give you is often a lot of your pop fiction is inspired by something. You know, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything is inspired by something else, or at least inspired by some sort of archetype that ties into the classics. Eventually, if you follow the inspirations, you're eventually going to get to the classics. So, for example, Transformers is a science fiction war story. If you follow the history of war stories, you're eventually going to get to the Iliad. This is the archetypal war story. So Transformers fans, who are Transformers fan consumers, I recommend giving the Iliad a shot, if you're able to read it. I read the Robert Fagel's translation, and it was pretty good. You will need to spend some time with it. I'm hesitant to recommend this to a consumer just because of how much of an attention span it requires. But it's also a really good classic to start with because all the other classics end up referencing it in some other way. Especially in English literature, in Western literature, everything ultimately goes back to the Iliad or the Bible. By looking at those classical references, by going back in time and reading the classics, you are going to get more out of the pop fiction, right? Even in Transformers, you have the Ark. You'll be able to appreciate the symbolism of the Ark and Transformers a lot more when you know the story of Noah's flood in the Bible. You're going to appreciate names like Optimus Prime a little bit better when you understand that those are Latin words coming from the Latin tradition. And if you understand the Latin tradition, you're going to get a more appreciation for what Optimus Prime represents. Another important idea in being a healthy fan, in creating a healthy hierarchy of your interest, of your identity, of your needs, and of what you do, and this is something I'm working on, so I'm not a good example of this, but this is something I'm aiming to, is create more than you consume. Do your own writing, do your own blog, do your own YouTube channel, create your own art, create your own music, and more so than that, also be original, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time working on fan fiction and stuff like that. Fan fiction is a good start to teach you how to write, to give you sort of like, it's like the training wheels for a bicycle. And fan fiction can be good, of course, but you will find that you will really shine and you will really be able to expand your mind when you create your own thing, your own original fiction. This is the guy who's made a 10-year-long fan fiction shared universe series, right? This is coming from me. It's best if you can write original fiction. Use fan fiction as a start, but then that should get you into the groove of writing original fiction. Even if it's inspired by pop fiction, that's okay, right? But original fiction is key. By creating more than you consume, you stop being passive. You stop being a consumer. And by stop being passive, you can assert yourself. You can find your own identity as opposed to being dependent on pop fiction for your identity. You start to realize who you are, and at the end of the day, that is a very key point in the meaning of life. You need to know who you are, and as long as you are tied down and dependent on a corporation's piece of fiction or something like that, it's going to be hard to find who you truly are. That's why it is key to create more than you consume, or at least aim to do so. Are you creating anything? Are you writing? Are you creating your own YouTube channel? Are you making your own videos, right? Are you directing your own movies? Are you making your own music? Right? These are important things, and I suggest you start. If you have no skills on creating anything, I suggest you start learning. Then you will find that you are truly living. And this other section that I just sort of tacked on here because it was the last thing that came to mind was merchandise, memorabilia. This is things like people who are in their 20s just buying countless Transformer toys or having a collection of Funko Pops. I'm married to a Funko Pop. Whoa. The fact of the matter is, less is more. So rather than buying a huge collection of Funko Pops or Funko, making you sure you buy every single Transformer in the Transformers wave of figures coming out, do you really care about that obscure G2 character that got a toy released recently? From the 90s? Do you really care about Sky Swoop or whoever it is? My recommendation is, especially if you feel that need to buy something, focus on a favorite character, but you don't even have to get that character every single time they make a new toy of him. Just, very similar to how I suggested reading pop fiction. Oh, this character that I really love and have a strong connection to, I really love this story. This story about this character really helped me a lot in my life. The lessons I learned from that helped me. It'd be nice to have a little reminder of that. And they just released a new toy. Or let's say, when I was a child I had this toy, and I have a good memory of me at my grandparents' house playing with that toy, and my grandparents stopped to talk to me and tried to transform it, and they just made a newer version and I don't have the old version anymore, and people are saying it's a good solid figure, then yeah, look, by all means get that. But I want you to think about money, why we have money. Money is ultimately to meet our needs and also to help others. It's for things like gifts, I think it's better to give than to receive. So if you want to buy, not saying that it's bad to buy something for yourself, but I really want you to think. Money is important for family. Can you support your family? Or are you saving up to build a family? Again, not saying spending money on a toy every now and then is wrong. It's not. That's okay. But remember, what is the key idea of this entire video? The key idea is moderation, right? Be holistic and think about your goals. At the end of the day, to be a healthy fan is to put fandom, for lack of a better term, into its proper orderly place inside an already healthy or working to become healthy structure, lifestyle, what have you. You'll find that if you try to buy every single Funko Pop or every single Transformers toy, it's just going to cause stress. It's going to cause frustration when a toy is newly released that you get and then it's low quality. You know, and it's one thing if you're using the toys for creative purposes, like for a stop motion series, that's at least better than just buying the toys and then leaving them on a shelf or something. But also remember originality that I brought up earlier when I talked about creating. You know, let's think about my Transformers collection. I made 2 different Transformers collection videos, one from when I was in America, one from when I was in Japan. And the American collection video was huge because I was a child in America, and a vast majority of those figures I received as a child, and that's great, you know, toys are made for kids. When I moved to Japan, I'm an adult, and I'm more selective with how I buy Transformers figures. Let me show you all the Transformers I have here in Japan. I have Bumblebee. This is a gift that was given to me by the Lays Boy. MC the Lays Boy. This is Optimus Prime. This was given to me as a gift by my girlfriend. This is Megatron, War for Cybertron Megatron. I like the character of Megatron, I'm a fan, so I got him. I also got him discounted at the Japanese equivalent of Goodwill. So I didn't buy him mint in box, I didn't buy him straight from retail. This is a relatively older figure, so I got him. He goes with my Optimus Prime. This is Optimus Prime. I got him because I really like Optimus Prime and the virtues and values he embodies, and also just as a little nostalgic, you know, he is sort of the Transformer in my mind. Now you might say, Radix, didn't you already have an Optimus Prime? Again, I got this myself. My girlfriend got me this later. She did not know that I had an Optimus Prime. I would not have gotten this Optimus Prime after my girlfriend had gotten me an Optimus Prime. I got this Optimus Prime first. And again, secondhand, at Goodwill. This is Ironhide. Again, secondhand, Goodwill. I got him because I like Ironhide, but also he has a southern accent. He's a southerner. He's one of the main southern Transformers, southern coded Transformers, and I, as a southerner, really like that. So I have my southern, you know, my redneck Ironhide here. So that's why I have Ironhide. I have that connection to the character. This is Beast Wars Tarantulas from the 90s that I got secondhand. I got him for like $1 at Goodwill. But I got this for a few reasons. Yes, I do like Tarantulas, but also that this is an old Beast Wars figure from the actual Beast Wars time period. And I think this was the oldest figure I've ever seen of Transformers. I've never actually held a OG G1 Transformer in my life. So this is the oldest one. This Beast Wars one is the oldest one I've ever touched, ever owned. So I got it for that. And I really love Beast Wars too. And also, old figure that was on sale for $1, right? So it's kind of a no-brainer. Over here we have Perceptor. I really like the character of Perceptor. I like that he's searching for knowledge. I like his search for science. I like all these things. I had that strong connection. My personality, I feel, is tied similarly to Perceptor's. Also, he's a microscope. That's pretty cool. And also, on sale at Goodwill for $1, not bought new. Then we have this guy. He's a Beast Wars, I think Beast Wars Neo character. I forget his name. Oh no, the Transformers lore guy forgot a character's name. Okay, this is Dead End. He is a Predacon from Beast Wars Neo. I don't care about Dead End as a character at all. What I liked was that this, again, old figure, old character, you know, this is OG, so I wanted an OG figure, again on sale for $1. It's also a Japanese character, and I am living in Japan, so I thought it'd be nice to have a Japanese character while living in Japan, and it's this guy on sale for $1, so I thought sure. And out of all of them, this is probably the guy I regret getting the most, because I didn't care for Beast Wars Neo that much. I don't care for this character at all. I just got it because it was on sale, old, and Japanese in Japan. Slightly consumer behavior, TBH. And that's all. That's all from those are all the Transformers I have since 2019 when I moved to Japan. So 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So in 5 years, I have gotten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Transformers. Well, no, Bumblebee wasn't even. Bumblebee was from America, so 7 Transformers in 5 years. You know, that is a more relatively healthy consume pattern. Anyway, I've been recording for over an hour now. This is my longest video in a long time. But in summary, it's very possible to be a healthy fan. Just consume in an orderly manner, include things that are really good that should be consumed. If there's any sentence I said in this video that you particularly want me to go into more detail in its own video, please let me know in the comments below. I would be very happy to expound more, because this was meant as a brief overview and it turned into an hour. This is a very dense video. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end it because we've been going on for too long. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. You guys are mad lads. Please subscribe to the channel for more videos. Follow me on social media. All the links are in the description, and have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.